Hey guys, welcome back to Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park and to one of our last museum tour video series videos. My name is Ranger James. I'm standing here in the corner near where our artillery piece is at, the cannon. Behind me we have a picture, somewhat life-size, of William Tecumseh Sherman on his horse Duke. And then to my right, your left, we have a picture of Atlanta after the Union occupation in 1866. But today, our focus is going to be on the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain specifically. And what I have here is a visual aid, which is a map full of troop movements that is going to help us, again, kind of visualize how the battle took place. So the important thing to remember is that both these armies are trying to move as quickly as possible. For one, the Confederates want to stop the Union Army from getting to Atlanta. For the Union Army and for William Tecumseh Sherman, Atlanta is the opportunity to show the American public that the war can be won if it is captured, and to sort of give back faith in Abraham Lincoln for his election in 1864. So the Atlanta campaign begins in March of that year, and what they're going to do is right there at the Tennessee-Georgia border, they're going to begin to move along the railroad line, which is now 75. It was the Western Atlantic Railroad back then. And Sherman is really good at being able to turn the Confederate flank and to outflank them at every turn. It takes him 6 weeks to get here. Now again, that's important. It takes him 6 weeks to get here, fighting every step of the way. And when they finally reach Kennesaw Mountain, it's one of the last natural defensible positions for the Confederate Army before they reach the city of Atlanta, just 20 miles out. And the Confederates, what they've done is they've leased slaves from the area to construct a series of trenches coming down. I'll move closer so you can see. Right at about 12 miles worth of trenches coming down along the railroad line, curving on top of the mountain, down by Pigeon Hill, and then extending a little farther out than Culp Farm, a little bit farther south from where the park's boundaries are today. And Sherman meets this obstacle, and he can see how well entrenched the Confederates are here. So he begins to entrench his own troops here, and the fighting sort of breaks down to a slog. It's important to note that it was raining for several days ahead of the fighting that occurred here. So you can just imagine what sort of miserable conditions each of the sides are having to face as they're digging these trenches, as they're having these skirmishes, these cannonade firings all along the line. And this is going to be June 18th that this occurs. Now, Sherman has a lot on his shoulders. For one, again, he's got to break the stalemate and he's got to capture Atlanta before November. Another thing that's on his mind is that up in Virginia, Grant and Lee are also kind of in a stalemate at the same time. So again, lots of pressure on him to get past this and to move forward. I mentioned before it took them 6 weeks to get to Kennesaw Mountain. They're going to be operating in this vicinity for another 3 weeks, just to show you what kind of fighting we're dealing with here. Well, on June 22nd, 1864, Sherman gets the idea that he's going to try to once again outflank the Confederates. He's going to try to go around them at their southern point. So he's going to task Hooker, General Hooker, to come around and try to get around the Confederate line, see if he can find a toehold there, and push the Confederates back. What he doesn't plan on, though, is this gentleman right here, John Bell Hood, being in the way. Now, John Bell Hood's corps was moved there specifically for this reason. John Bell Hood, just to give you a bit of background on him, he's a pit bull of a guy. He loves to fight. He was wounded several times during the war already at Gettysburg and at Chickamauga just a couple months later, leading his men into battle. So he's a very aggressive leader, and he is tasked with stopping this Union advance. So he has a couple of choices. He can either dig a series of trenches and defend them, or he can go on the offensive and attack the Union Army. What do you think he does? Well, he attacks. So he takes his men, they march out, and they meet the Union host here at the Battle of Culp Farm. And that's going to be June 22nd, 1864. The Union Army, they see that coming from miles around, though. So what they do is they line up a bunch of cannons, and they basically just blow the Confederates out of the water there. And it is a Union victory, but, however, the important thing about this particular battle at the farmhouse is that Sherman realizes that it's not going to be so easy to just go around the Confederates at this point. If he can't go around them, he's going to try to punch through them. And it's going to be a very dangerous and risky tactic. So what he decides to do is on June 27th, 1864, he's going to have a couple of diversionary attacks, one to the north, coming up over our big open field in front of the visitor center. We are here, by the way, if you can see that, up against the foot of the mountain. We're going to have one to the south. And the idea is to try and stretch the Confederates thin in the center. You see, Sherman knows something. Sherman knows that the Confederates are actually outnumbered 2-1 here. They've got just about 60,000 men versus Sherman's 110,000 men. So he knows that if he can just pour men into the central section here, like a big blue wave, then eventually he'll be able to overrun the positions, the trenches there, drive the Confederates back to Marietta, capture the city, and that's one step closer to his goal of capturing Atlanta. June 27th rolls around, and the battle doesn't take place the way that he imagines it would. The attack is scheduled to go along at 8 o'clock in the morning. 8 o'clock in the morning rolls around. 3 of the 4 attacks occur according to plan. The 2 diversionary attacks and one here in the center called Pigeon Hill. And I mentioned before, it was rainy, it was really wet weather. This whole area is nothing but swampland right there near Burnt Hickory Road. So the Union Army, they try to navigate through that and then fight their way up a rocky hill, Pigeon Hill, up to the top. And if any of you guys have ever hiked Pigeon Hill, you can attest that it's steep, it's rocky, and it's probably one of the worst places to try and attack if you were a soldier, especially with the kind of shoes and the equipment that they were having back then. The Confederates are well entrenched. They're actually using that natural barrier of the rocks to their advantage. Some of them are rolling rocks down against their attackers. The Union Army gets to within a stone's throw of the Confederate line, and they're quickly driven back within the hour. A lot of guys, all they can do for the Union Army is just hunker down and wait till nightfall, where they can slowly crawl back to the Union line. It's a total defeat there. Now, the second prong of his major attack to the center is going to occur at a place called Cheatham Hill. And if you can see where the Confederate line, this red line, is going to come out in an angle, that's known as the dead angle. And the idea is that the Union forces, 8,000 men, are going to surround that angle, push through, and again, capture Marietta. This attack is delayed by almost an hour. Now imagine you're a Confederate soldier, you're sitting in your trench, you're wide awake, of course. It's about 8:30 in the morning. You can hear the battle going on all around you, all other sides of the line. You know something's up. And you know another thing, too. If you start to get cannon fire and it goes silent, the next thing is going to be the infantry coming after you, and that's exactly what happens. At 9 o'clock in the morning, there's a cannonade that tries to soften up the Confederate line there, but it doesn't work. And then the guns fall silent, and 8,000 Union troops come up to try and take Cheatham Hill. Now, one of the heroes of the battle here is a man named Dan McCook. And to try and get his guys going and get their courage up, he recites a poem to them about facing the odds here that they're about to face. And it goes something like this. Out spake brave Horatius, the captain of the gate, to every man upon this earth death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than by facing fearful odds for the ashes of your fathers and the temples of your gods? It's about an old Greek warrior as he was trying to defend the Tiber River against attack. Just as soon as he gets done saying that, the order to charge is given. And the Union guys have to run the length of 4 football fields up a steep incline. And then when they get to the very top, that's when the real fighting starts. It's frenzied. It's hand-to-hand combat. Dan McCook himself is seen standing on top of the Confederate earthworks, waving his sword, saying, "Surrender, you cowards," before he is shot in the chest and falls back. He is mortally wounded. He'll be taken to Steubenville, Ohio, his hometown, where he will die in July. We lose another Union general there, General Harker, who is 28 years old. He's trying to spur his men on his white horse, and he gets up to the very front of the line, and he's shot, mortally wounded there as well. And again, the attack just falls to pieces here. It's a complete disaster. The Union Army ends up going down to the bottom of Cheatham Hill, where they dig in, and they're going to sit there in a stalemate for the better part of a week. Now, while all of this is going on for the next week or so, while this trench warfare is going along, there's a lot of sharpshooting that's occurring. It's very dangerous. Sherman is able to get some Union troops behind the Confederate line here down south. So his original plan did end up working out. He was able to outflank them here. And once Joseph E. Johnston, the Confederate commander, saw that he had blue behind him, he decided that it was time to give up the position. And in the middle of the night, July 2nd, 1864, the Confederates abandoned the trenches on the Kennesaw line in favor for a more, what they thought would be a more advantageous position along the Chattahoochee River. Now, what ends up happening is once Kennesaw Mountain is lost, General Joseph E. Johnston is removed from command, and John Bell Hood, remember him, aggressive, he takes over. He launches a series of 4 different attacks in and around the city of Atlanta, loses every single one of them. Eventually, Sherman is able to go south of the city to Jonesboro, cut the railroad line there, basically starve the city out of supplies, and the Confederates are forced to abandon the city of Atlanta September 2nd, 1864. A wire goes to Washington telling Lincoln that Atlanta is ours and fairly won from Sherman's perspective, and he continues the fight. Now, November, as we're coming along, they're going to stay in the city up until November, at which time Sherman is going to split his forces. We've got some forces actually heading up into Tennessee, still fighting after Hood. The other forces are going to split, and the idea is that Sherman is going to get lost in the wilderness. He's going to leave the railroad line behind, and they're going to live solely off of whatever they can find from the harvest, live off the land, forage, all the way down, 60,000 troops to the sea. And even his own men don't know where they're at up until about a week before they hit the city of the city of Savannah, excuse me. And they're going to capture that city peacefully just before December of 1864. They're then going to turn their attention up into the Carolinas, and Sherman was not too pleased with the Carolinas. He believed that they started this mess, and in his words, if they wanted war, he was going to give them war. So he burned out Charleston and Columbia, and he's going to make his way up into North Carolina. He's once again chasing after the forces of Joseph E. Johnston, going up into North Carolina. This is going to be his Carolina campaign. And that leads us into 1865 and the end of the Civil War. A lot of things happen in the month of April of 1865. For one, we have General Lee surrendering April 9th, 1865 to Grant up in Virginia. Now, a lot of people believe that this was the end of the war, but that's not the case. You've got to remember that Lee was the commander of an army, not all of the armies at this time. But just 5 days after this, Lincoln is assassinated. And we'll cover more about the effects of that in our next video, which is going to deal with reconciliation and Reconstruction. But it's not good for the South. On April 26, 1865, Joseph E. Johnston surrenders his sword to William Tecumseh Sherman near Durham Station, North Carolina. And funny enough, these two gentlemen who had fought so fiercely against each other during the Atlanta campaign after the war are going to become pretty good friends. And we'll discuss that in another series that we have coming up on Sherman. But needless to say, after Sherman dies, Joseph E. Johnston is one of his pallbearers, and he will eventually be sick because of being out in Sherman's funeral, and he will himself pass. So as we go along, the war begins to wind down and slowly trickle to a close. You've got this sort of domino effect of the Confederate generals laying down their swords to their Union counterparts. And again, the war slowly comes to an end. Now, the importance of the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain and the importance of the Atlanta campaign in general as our sort of stamp on the face of history is the fact that with Atlanta's fall, Lincoln was able to convince the public that this war could be won, and he was able to be re-elected for a second term in 1864, which would have lasting consequences throughout history. Now, I hope that you guys enjoyed that. Stay in tune for our next video, which is, again, going to deal with Reconstruction and Reconciliation. That should be coming out within the next week. But we hope to see you at the mountain.